A bunch of Republican senators want $500,000 each for getting their phones subpoenaed. This is Law and Society. Please subscribe. Let's talk about this. When their great leader is suing taxpayers for $230 million, what's a little shakedown of their own? But here's what really gets me. Senate Republicans, in their fight against Senate Democrats in the passage of the continuing resolution, were able to sneak in a provision in the continuing resolution that will allow certain senators to sue the federal government for $500,000 each for having their phones subpoenaed by the DOJ when the DOJ was investigating Donald Trump's conspiracy to upend the constitutional order. And these senators happened to be communicating with Donald Trump before, on, and after Donald Trump conspired and then actually obstructed a congressionally mandated legislative function, that is, certifying the results of the presidential election. But Democrats couldn't push through the Affordable Care Act extensions, which was the central point of the shutdown to begin with. They caved, and instead they got a guarantee of a vote on the Affordable Care Act extension by the second week of December. I believe that's when the provisions are scheduled to expire. Realistically, I don't see any ACA tax credit extension happening in mid-December, even if Majority Leader John Thune follows through on his promise to see through a Senate bill that funds the tax premium credits. Mike Johnson has made no commitment to pass such a bill, and Donald has not really said anything other than he'd be talking to Democrats after the shutdown ends. And now that it has ended, whether he will sit down with Democrats and come up with a way to extend ACA benefits remains to be seen. Donald's famous for not keeping his promises, so doing what he said he'll do will be a surprise to me. But we live in a strange time. Maybe Donald has plans for a Trump care plan like he claims to have. Maybe that's something like Medicare for all. And if that happens, Donald will have changed millions of lives for the better. But will he? He has the chance of changing his entire legacy of hatred and division by transforming the healthcare industry. Doing that would be partly following through on his central campaign promise of bringing down the cost of living. But will he? Or is he more likely to dine with the CEOs of those healthcare insurance companies at yet another Great Gatsby-style party? At what point will tax-paying Americans rise up and stop letting their government waste their money by enriching fraudulent and abusive practices of the ruling regime and party? $500,000 for your phone being subpoenaed by the government during a federal criminal investigation to see if you had any part in a federal crime is not grounds to sue the government for $500,000 for doing what the government is supposed to be doing, which is investigating and prosecuting illegal actions. So get out of here with your jaded, tired claims that you were in some way harmed because the government was doing its job. If you were communicating with somebody who was under criminal investigation for conspiracy when they were engaged in that alleged criminal conspiracy, you automatically qualify as somebody any investigative agency would also want to investigate. Not doing so would be a dereliction of law enforcement duties. And trying to get paid for being investigated is peak entitlement syndrome that the rich and powerful often experience. And we're seeing that play out with Donald Trump and now these senators. and how even the House, before letting such a provision slip through. Slipping this into a continuing resolution betrays the American taxpayer. It also has a codified record that our government reimbursing federal officials for being federally investigated for nexus to a vast conspiracy, criminal conspiracy for which the current president was indicted and was about to be prosecuted for had he not won the 2024 election. That is a harmful precedent to set, to create a legislative means to pay these senators $500,000 each of the taxpayers' money. So call your representatives and senators and push them to have this provision repealed. Do it in a bipartisan manner. Not doing so would harm our constitutional order. It will set a legislative precedent for federal officials suing the federal government for inconveniences caused by federal criminal investigations of them. Every criminal and their associates will then have a cause of action for any and all incidental harm caused by law enforcement's lawful actions of investigating and or arresting and prosecuting you. And if you don't do illegal things, this should not concern you. But if you are constantly breaking the law, it would be grounds to ask the legislature to legalize a monetary compensation scheme where criminals and their associates are paid for being prosecuted. That makes no sense at all. The legal system works completely the other way. You pay if you have harmed somebody. You get paid if you have been harmed. If you cannot show harm, you can't get paid. Also, American taxpayers and our legal system does not subsidize bruised egos. With that said, thanks for listening. Please share the word. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.